Our next speaker has previously co-founded a digital agency and most recently was European Head of Strategy at Sapient Nitro. His particular emphasis is on the use of social technologies and co-creation for brand strategy, innovation, and experience. Today, we are honored to have at seats the Global Head of Strategy at FutureBrand. Welcome on stage, Tom Adams.
Good morning, everyone. That was a very flattering introduction. I don't recognize myself in these portraits. I'm Tom. I'm from FutureBrand. When my slides arrived, I will know what I'm going to say. And here they come. I may just give my presentation through the form of contemporary dance for a short time. Not yoga, but dance. How are we doing, tech? Deck? Exactly, I don't know what happened. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go back to paper. Alex talked about how paper is a disaster in the contemporary age, but I'm going to go back to it now because sometimes digital lets us down, doesn't it? I'm going to talk a little bit today about how great brands turn technology into human progress, and how great technology turns presentations into compelling experiences. Here we go. Right, wonderful. But I'm going to start out by taking us all back 150 years to two transformative technologies that made much of what we're doing in this room today and modern life possible. They are the humble light bulb and the electric telegraph. Now, what these two extraordinary pieces of technology have in common is that the patents for them were largely speaking in place many, many years before Edison on the right and Edison on the left and Morse on the right brought them into commercial application. The biggest single difference between the light bulb from Edison and the light bulbs before was the screw top, because it meant light bulbs could be turned upside down and put in the ceiling. And that was driven by a need in commercial shipping, not necessarily by the filament and the gas and the glass container that made light possible. Morse effectively created the software for the electric telegraph because he took a technology which was passing electrical impulses along long wires, and he created the language that allowed us to convert a tap here and a tap there into meaning at the other end at great distances and rapid speeds. What they did was they took technologies and they turned them into innovations. And that is one of the critical components I want to talk to you about today, is the fundamental difference between those two things, captured by the great author and thinker Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline, where he says, engineers say that a new idea has been invented when it's proven to work in the lab. Jorn was talking about the lab earlier on, as were others. The idea becomes an innovation only when it's replicated reliably on a meaningful scale at practical costs. Right, let's zoom forward. 1920, 95 years ago, nobody in this room was alive, I don't think, 95 years ago. If you were, then congratulations, and long may you continue. Arguably, many of the extraordinary technology inventions that informed progress during the 20th century had already been invented by 1920 or the early 20s. They include the domestic refrigerator, the internal combustion engine, insulin, the telephone, transatlantic travel. But who were the innovators, not the inventors of those extraordinary technologies? Well, arguably, it was the commercial pioneers like GE, like Ford, like Bell, like Lufthansa, and all the other pioneering organizations that took those technology inventions and made them available to everybody. They made it possible for ordinary people to keep their milk chilled in their homes and not have it go off. They made it possible for us to drive in private transportation that took us from A to B when we wanted to go and at speeds that were reliable. They made mainstream things that were otherwise unavailable to the mass market of people, and that's vitally important. Let's accelerate to 1980. 60 years on, 35 years ago, I was 6. Think back to 1980 and what you were doing then. Many of you, of course, weren't alive in 1980. That makes me feel old. In 1980, by the same measures I've just talked to you about from 1920, many of the technologies that we take for granted today and are powering this conference and the discussions we're having had already been invented. They include personal computing, mobile telephony, digital video. Genetic engineering, there's Dolly the sheep. She wasn't invented then, but she was later. She's a friend. Interactive gaming, there's the mighty Nintendo, and the world's first wind farm, and countless other technologies that were, for example, helping us to move beyond our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, I would argue, actually, it was the Microsofts and the Apples and the Intels and the Nokias and the Sonys and the Ericssons and the America Onlines that effectively democratized those technologies, turned them into benefits for you and me and everyone else in the world, made them affordable and distributed them to us in a way that could integrate them into our everyday lives. It was those organizations and the brands that drove trust in our consumption of them every day in, day out, where we spend our hard-earned money, that effectively turned those inventions into innovation. Now, typically speaking, people are quite pessimistic about the future, and I'm not. And I want to talk a little bit about why, because in the 35 years since 1980, by some of the major macro measures of improvement to the quality of human life, we are doing extraordinarily well. And if you think about that in the context of the technology transformation powered by innovation I've just mentioned, there's some startling areas in which we've improved human life. Infant mortality has increased by nearly 2/3 since 1990 worldwide. People living in extreme poverty against the Millennium Development Goals have halved since 1990 to 2010. There are 1.7 billion people in the world who have access to electricity today that didn't have it in 1990, and that's even ahead of the curve of population growth worldwide. The youth literacy rate has increased from 83% to 89% in that time, which, if you think about the number of young people in the world, represents a huge number in net terms. Since 1970, every single year, on average, we have been getting older by 4 months a year. Life expectancy is improving exponentially. Just take it down to a more granular level. In the EU alone since 2000, road traffic-related deaths have been reduced by 36% between 2000 and 2010. And that's in the context of an increase in vehicle registration around the world of 15% between 2007 and 2010. More cars, fewer accidents, better tech. Go figure. Organizations like eBay are now powering transactions for over 200,000 businesses in the UK alone, generating something like £6 billion worth of revenue for small startups, for entrepreneurs, and liberalizing our access to customers and to new streams of income that weren't possible before those things happened. In that context, guess how much the average GDP per capita was in 1980? It was $871 GDP per capita. In 2013, it was just over $3,000 per capita, and that's in advance of inflation. And if you believe the research by the Happy Planet report in 2012, there is a direct correlation between tech savviness, so the access people have in different countries to technology, and their levels of happiness. So places like Denmark and the United States are indexing very, very highly on those key measures. Tech makes us happy. Makes me happy. Now, you can see what my hypothesis is, okay? So brands liberalize, democratize, and make access to technology, inventions, in a way that turns them into innovation and improves our lives in measurable ways. Let's leap forward to 2050, 35 years from now. And I wonder what kind of progress technology powered by brands brought into our everyday lives might drive, and the kind of ways in which we might measure it as a result. Unfortunately, I'm going to be 75 in 2050. It doesn't look good, does it? It doesn't look good. I'm rather hoping that the Singularity University is going to invent a computer that's powerful enough for me to actually stop aging in about 2026, when I will hopefully be a sort of silver fox and more attractive than I am now, which is not going to be difficult. Let's look at, though, that 2050 period in the context of digital transformation trends, all of which you have already written down and tweeted 50 times since this conference started. Those trends are collaborative consumption. They are the quantified self. They are connected ecosystems. They are automation. God bless the driverless car. They are artificial intelligence. Back to the Singularity University. I'm really holding out hope for that. Now let's just think for a second, this is courtesy of TechCrunch, by the way, let's think for a second about, even today, the ways in which technology have completely disrupted and changed businesses and business models. So, largely speaking, retail and taxi firms and hotel firms and media companies are able to be among the largest in the world and hold no inventory, have no taxis, and actually create no content. And if you think about, for example, what Skype did to voice over IP, when it was just something that was restricted to a small group of passionate people promising the potential for video conferencing over the internet. Now my grandma and my 5-year-old daughter can talk on Skype in real time without paying a penny, and Skype don't own any cables or wires or telephone exchanges anywhere. These brands have made it possible for us to accept and understand the benefits of these technology in a way that turns them into verbs, that turns them into things that we do. So, I'm going to pause there and just make some wild future assumptions, which I'm paid to do, but I don't have to be a futurist to do it. First wild assumption: the future will be better than the present. I am an optimist. I hope you are too. Second wild future assumption, this is a wild one: personal data, I believe, will be managed and owned by the citizen, not by corporations or government. I think we're going to win. In that context, consumption decisions, the things that we do every single day, talked about decision making a minute ago, to buy and use the things that we need and want to help us survive and have pleasure, will not require a compromise in the way that they do today between, for example, a moral decision and making a profit, or between comfort and the environment, or between enjoyable experiences and price. It won't require a compromise. And that's because brands are increasingly in our lives allowing us to have our cake and to eat it. They're giving us what we want and what we need at the same time. They're giving us products that attend to the environment and also get the food off our plates, that allow us to drive fast sports cars with 0 emissions, that give us everything that we want without having to make a compromise as a result. Those brands, and the ones that are most likely to become mainstream, are the brands that are either integrating or powered by technology already. And they are already here. You know they are because you're using them all the time. The difference is that they're still niche. And what will happen, as William Gibson so artfully pointed out, is that they're just unevenly distributed. And actually in 35 years from now, my argument is that they will become mainstream. So when they are mainstream, just like domestic refrigeration is now something we take for granted, just as is the light bulb, what will that mean for us? Well, let's just take a few really, really simple examples that you've already seen and heard and are almost cliches of our sector. So, one issue: we have a massive global problem with food waste. I'm going to take some figures from the UK, because that's where I live, even though I'm not there very much. The average UK household wastes £60 a month by throwing away food. That is 4.2 million tons of food and drink every year in one country of a population of about 60 million or so. What's the answer? Well, it may be the LG smart fridge, but it's certainly going to be domestic appliances that help us to track and keep an eye on the foods that we use and make sure we're using the right amounts and we're not disposing of food without it being necessary. Collaborative consumption, an issue. It's so difficult, isn't it, to get access to the money you need to borrow it for a mortgage or for a loan and do that affordably. And if you have money, say if you have a pension or you're saving for your retirement, it's very, very difficult with current interest rates anywhere in the world to make money on that. Enter a brand like Lending Club, the peer-to-peer organization in the US, which has already generated over $5 billion of loans. And borrowers can reduce their interest rates on average by 31%, and lenders can increase their returns by a factor of 4 or 5. Extraordinary potential from peer-to-peer lending. So, how might then, in this context, the future be improved by brands? So, cliché alert, I have to, by law, put an Apple Watch on a slide in these presentations. It's mandatory. But what if the Apple Watch and wearable devices, Fitbit and Fuel Band, are not just used in niche applications by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, but are used by billions of people? And what if the resulting health monitoring and dietary controls become mainstream activities for those billions of people? Well, just take, for example, the relationship between obesity and diabetes, the diabesity problem. 4.9 million people died worldwide last year of diabetes. Imagine if just 10% of those people were able to track and monitor their health more effectively as a result of wearable technologies. That would have meant a saving of 500,000 lives. People would be with us today, potentially, that weren't as a result. Let's just think about how Nest and Loop, without being niche activities, are then in everyone's homes, in billions of homes around the world. And you can control your energy consumption to reduce the waste of the energy you're using and optimize it perfectly down to the single joule. What might that mean for the world and the future that we live in? Well, in the UK, the average dual fuel energy bill is £1,200 a year. There are 26 million households in the UK. That means that on average in the UK, the combined population are spending £33.4 billion a year on electricity and gas. to heat their homes and cook their food? What if we're able to reduce the consumption of that energy with mainstreaming those technologies in the way that's happening? We may well save UK consumers nearly £3 or £4 billion a year, just on energy consumption. And imagine that multiplied over many, many hundreds of countries. What if driverless cars, big fan, are able to become mainstream, and Google and other organizations, the automotive companies, are able to make those things accessible to us on our daily commute? So what if hundreds of thousands, millions of drivers each year are avoiding the risk of crashing in their cars because of automation? Well, let's just take 2010 as an example. There were 1.2 million road traffic-related deaths around the world in 2010. If just 10% of those had been avoidable through automation, we would have saved 124,000 lives. The list goes on. There's another example which is around the secondary markets created by organizations like ThreadUp, which you may know help you to exchange clothes you don't want anymore but might have some value to another consumer. Helping to end, if you like, the cycle of disposability that's such a part of fashion, or has been over the last 10 years. 350,000 tons of clothes were thrown away in the UK in just 1 year. 350,000 tons of clothes, okay? Some of them, I'm sure, were wearable. That's £140 million worth of clothes thrown away. What if we were able to just sell on 10% of those clothes, okay? 10%. That might mean a reduction of 35,000 tons of clothing, which, by the way, is 35,000 of those. And it might also mean an estimated increase of £14 million back into your pocket as a consumer, because instead of throwing it away, you're creating a secondary market which hasn't been made possible by the widely available technologies powered and brought to you by brands like ThreadUp. So, let's draw this together. It may well be that the brands that we know and love today are still the brands driving those changes in our lives in the future, but there may be some new ones. And there may even be some niche brands today which become more mainstream because of the power that they give to us as consumers to get access to the things that change and improve our lives. So what about things like Raspberry Pi that make this 3D printable laptop available with $20 to $30 components so that you can effectively download and print your own computer anywhere in the world for less than $200? That makes a significant difference to people's access to computing in the way that Microsoft envisioned in the early days of their time. What about organizations like Bleep Bleep, started by a former colleague of mine, that are helping to make the almost impossible act of parenting and learning how to be a young parent possible by creating ecosystems around health and monitoring and temperature control to make sure that you're as good a parent as you possibly can be? What about things like Amazon with new devices that help you to, just in the context of running out of something like washing powder, to press a button and have that ordered so you never ever run out of anything again? What about, even more noble, the idea of 3D prosthetic printing for the children of war in South Sudan by this extraordinary project, Project Daniel, and ways in which you can start to use technology to help improve lives anywhere in the world at any time? And one of my favorites, which I'm sure you all know, is CClickFix, which harnesses the power of distributed sensing to help citizens in any single community anywhere in the world to access a central database where they say, that pothole is a problem, or that broken window is a problem, or that bin hasn't been emptied. And on aggregate, what they do is they show local government with limited resources exactly where they should invest those resources to improve people's lives day in, day out. These are things which are happening now, but are going to be, I would argue, increasingly mainstream, and they're going to change life as we know it in exponentially beneficial ways. So who will drive the change? Well, I think actually it's going to be a combination of us, so it's going to be consumers, driving demand for things that are really, really changing our lives. It's going to be corporations meeting those needs and also driving towards unmet needs through innovation. And it's going to be government creating the regulatory environment where that's possible. This is not a utopian vision. And just to conclude, I am an optimist, but I'm not irrational, okay? These things are with us today. Brands are going to mainstream them, and they're going to make sure that the benefits to human society are exponentially delivered to all of us in the future. And I'm going to leave you with my good friend Abe Lincoln's thought, which is that the best thing about the future is it comes one day at a time. So through your consumption now in this room, and when you go home and tomorrow, you can start to make a difference to the future right away. I've been Tom. Thanks very much.